Hello again. This is going to be part 2 of the kind of sample production possibility frontier problem videos that I make, and it's going to be a continuation of the first video. So if you haven't watched the first one, you might want to go back and do that. That's the one where we determined, given these two PPFs for Iowa and Nebraska, we determined who had the comparative advantage in corn, who had the comparative advantage in soybeans, by calculating their opportunity costs for each good. And then we talked about who would specialize in which good. So today is going to be kind of the extended parts of a question like this. And the reason I'm making these videos is because you are definitely going to see a problem very similar to this on exam 1. And so I want to make sure that everyone knows what I'm looking for and how to calculate all the different things you need to for the exam problem. So once you've walked through determining the opportunity cost, comparative advantage, and specialization for two goods, I might ask you something like this question 1 here, which says, well, there's a typo I just noticed, but ignore that. It's supposed to say, suppose that before specialization in trade, Iowa and Nebraska divide their time equally between the production of corn and soybeans. That is, suppose they operate on the midpoints of their PPFs. If they then decide to specialize in the good in which they have a comparative advantage, what will be the gains in total production of corn and of soybeans? So you will see something like this on your exam. And to determine the answer to this question, you're going to need to make two tables that look something like this. You're going to want to put your two goods on top. So in this case, we have corn and soybeans. Those are the two goods that are being produced. Then you want to put your two participants or economies on the left, so Iowa, Nebraska. And then we're going to have a row that says total, because we're going to be adding together Iowa's production of corn plus Nebraska's production of corn, Iowa's production of soybeans plus Nebraska's production of soybeans. So the first part of the question is telling us how much Iowa and Nebraska produce of each good before they decide to specialize and trade. And they tell us that they are basically making half corn, half soybeans. They're on the midpoint of this line right here. So the way to calculate that is just look at your endpoints for each PPF. So for Iowa, we have 30 bushels of corn and 45 bushels of soybeans. And so before trade, they're telling us that Iowa was making 30 divided by 2, or half of 30, which is 15 units of corn. So I'm going to go down to my table here, and I'm going to put 15, and that's going to go here. So this is telling me that before trade and specialization, Iowa made 15 bushels of corn. Okay, and again, I just looked at the endpoint of the PPF and I divided it by 2. So 30 divided by 2 gives me 15. Okay, then I go to the soybeans for Iowa. On an exam, I wouldn't give you a number like this that's not easily divisible by 2, but I was just using a previously created problem and didn't think about it. So in this case, 45 divided by 2 is going to be 22.5. So 22.5, oops. Sorry about that. 22.5 bushels of soybeans created by Iowa before trade. So that's going to go right here. Okay, so now I know how much Iowa is making before trade. Now I want to figure out how many units or bushels of corn and soybeans Nebraska makes. So Nebraska, the midpoint of their PPF is going to be 40 bushels of corn divided by 2, which is 20 bushels of corn. So before trade, Nebraska produces 20 bushels of corn. And then 80, here's 80 divided by 2 is going to give me 40 bushels of soybeans produced by Nebraska. So you just take the endpoints of the PPF and divide them by 2. I guess I can show you real quick graphically what we're doing. So for Iowa, we're basically figuring out this point right here, which ended up being, sorry, it's not a very good drawing, but then same for Nebraska, we're just figuring out that midpoint of the PPF. So that's why we're dividing by 2 for each side. So this was 20. Oh, that's not going to work, is it? I'll just do it as a text. Okay, so 20. And 40. Okay, that's wasting time probably, but now you get what I'm saying, hopefully, that we were figuring out the midpoint of each PPF. We just take the endpoint divided by 2. Okay, so now back to our table. So now we have information about how many bushels of corn Iowa and Nebraska were producing. I want to add the 2 together because I'm looking, in this question, they're asking about total production of corn and soybeans. So that means they want to know together how many bushels of corn do Iowa and Nebraska produce and how many bushels of soybeans together they're producing. So we have to add Iowa's corn plus Nebraska's corn to figure that out. So I'm going to change colors so that I can do, so I'm basically adding 15 plus 20, and that's going to give me 35. I'm going to add 22 plus 0.5 plus 40, and that's going to give me the total of each good. So that's 35 bushels of corn, so 35 total bushels of corn produced before trade. And then let's see, what would that be? 62.5 bushels of soybeans produced before trade. So I'm going to circle these numbers because we're going to want to come back to these in a minute. So these are the important numbers we were figuring out. So once you find the midpoints, you make your little table like this. You want to figure out the total combined production amounts. 35 bushels of corn, 62.5 bushels of soybeans. Okay, so that's the first half. The second half is to figure out, okay, after Iowa and Nebraska decide to specialize, what is their production total going to look like? So we determined in the last video that, Iowa, so here I'm going to refer to this information up here. So Iowa, we determined in the last video, Iowa has the comparative advantage in corn and Nebraska has the comparative advantage in soybeans. And so from that, we knew that Iowa was going to specialize in corn because an economy always wants to specialize in the good in which they have a comparative advantage. So Iowa is going to produce only corn. They're going to stop producing soybeans. They're going to operate way down here on their PPF. They're going to make 0 bushels of soybeans and make only bushels of corn. So if they do that, they're going to end up making 30 bushels of corn. And then Nebraska, they had the comparative advantage in soybeans, so they're going to specialize in soybeans, which means they're going to make 80 bushels of soybeans and 0 bushels of corn. That's what it means to specialize. You're making only one of the 2 goods. So going down to my table, which shows after specialization and trade amounts, Iowa, again, is going to be making 30 bushels of corn. That's going to be 30. And they're not going to be making any bushels of soybeans, so I'm going to put a 0 in the soybeans box. 30 and 0. And then Nebraska is not going to be making any corn, so they'll make 0 bushels of corn. And they're going to be making 80 bushels of soybeans. So you would need to create these 2 tables on your own in order to answer this kind of question on the exam. Okay, now I'm going to do the same thing I did before. I'm going to add Iowa and Nebraska's totals, only now it's easy because there's a 0 in each row. So 30 plus 0, and then 0 plus 80. And that's going to give me 30 bushels of corn. And 80 bushels of soybeans. Okay. So here are my production amounts after trade. So this is an interesting one. I didn't intend for this to be the case, but it'll make for good conversation in this video, or monologue, I guess, since I'm the only one here. So if I look at my corn production, something interesting happened. I actually decreased, Iowa and Nebraska actually decreased the amount of corn they were making after specialization and trade. So the units of corn gained over here, remember the whole point of all this was to determine what will be the gains in total production of corn and of soybeans as a result of specialization. So this one kind of strangely, we determined that we'll actually have a -5 or less units of corn, 5 less units of corn to go around in the economy after specialization. That is unusual. If I ask you a question on the exam, it will always be that you gain both units of the good. But in this case, that's not what happened. Production of corn actually dropped by 5 units. I got that by just taking the 35 before trade and comparing it to the 30 after trade, or 30 minus 35 gives me -5 units of corn gained. Okay, and then looking at soybeans, this is more typical example. Before trade, I only had 62.5 bushels of soybeans, but after trade, there will be 80. So 80 minus 62.5 gives me a difference of 17.5 bushels of soybeans. So the answer to that second part of the question would be 17.5 bushels of soybeans were gained as a result of specialization and trade. And so you can tell that the increase of soybeans, outweighs that loss of corn in this example. And so there are overall a higher gain from trade than there was a loss from trade. So the answer to what will be the gains in total production of corn would be, there would actually be a loss. There would not be a gain. There would be a loss of 5 bushels of corn as a result of trade. But there would be a gain of 17.5 bushels of soybean. And again, I got that by comparing the before trade numbers to the after trade total numbers, because we only are concerned about total production in the two economies. So those are kind of the steps to answering a question like this. And again, on an exam, you would expect to see a gain in both goods. Both corn and soybeans would have an increase, not a loss. All right, so let's go to the second type of question you might see or will see. So based on these PPFs, in the last video, we made these calculations. We figured out that Iowa's opportunity cost of corn was 1.5 bushels of soybeans per bushels of corn, while Nebraska's was 2 bushels of soybeans per bushels of corn. So I'm going to take this information here as given, because the last video I showed you how to calculate that. All right, so let's look at the question. This question says, at which of the following prices, if any, would Iowa and Nebraska both benefit from trade? So the key point to remember in a question where they're asking you about prices is to remember that we always want the price to be to fall in between the two opportunity costs of the good. So this is what you want to remember. You're looking for a price that falls in between your two opportunity costs. I'm going to change the color. Okay, so the first step I would recommend in a question like this is to look at your answer choices, take a look at them, and see which units they're giving you first. So, for example, answer A says, one possible price could be 9 bushels of soybeans for 3 bushels of corn. What that's going to tell me is which opportunity cost I want to look at, because this is the same thing as saying 9 bushels of soybeans over 3 bushels of corn. In other words, they're giving me soybeans over corn, which is going to be the opportunity cost for corn. Because corn, remember, the opportunity cost is always given in terms of the other good. So if I look up here at my opportunity cost for corn, see how those match or are similar in form to my answer choices? It's bushels of soybeans per bushels of corn. So these are the two opportunity costs I want to look at, not the soybeans, because those were given in terms of corn per soybeans. But my answer choices are soybeans per bushel of corn. So I want to match my opportunity cost to my answer choices, soybeans per corn. Okay, so these are the two numbers. These are the two opportunity costs, 1.5 and 2, that I'm going to want my price to fall in between. So whatever price I choose or determine, it needs to be greater than 1.5 and less than 2. All right, so the next step is to go through your answer choices and get them in the form of a decimal so that you can compare them to your opportunity cost. So to do this, you just take the first number, 9, you divide it by the second number. So I'm going to do 9 divided by 3, which is going to give me 3 bushels of soybeans per bushel of corn. So that's one of the possible prices they're suggesting or giving us. 9 divided by 3, which is 3. Okay, so I would just write next to each answer choice the decimal form of it. Okay, then 7, the next choice is going to be 7 divided by 7, which gives me 1. 7 divided by 7 is 1 bushel of soybeans per bushel of corn. And then answer C says 7 divided by 4. 7 divided by 4, which is going to give me 1.75. 1.75 bushels of soybeans per bushel of corn. Okay, so once you've gotten all your answer choices into a decimal form, now you want to compare them or find which one falls in between your two opportunity costs. So the first choice, 3, is greater than Iowa's opportunity cost and Nebraska's opportunity cost. It's greater than 1.5 and it's greater than 2. So that is not going to be the answer. It's too high. So I can eliminate A. So it's not 3. Make a little line through that. Okay, that's too high. All right, answer choice B, 1 bushel of soybeans per bushel of corn is lower than both the 1.5 and 2 for Iowa and Nebraska, so that's too low. Okay, but then answer C, 1.75, that's right in between 1.5 and 2. So it's right in between Iowa's opportunity cost and Nebraska's opportunity cost for corn. So C is going to be the answer. It's going to be the one that falls in between the two opportunity costs for Iowa and Nebraska. And then D, you'll always have an answer choice like this. which will never be the right one. It's never true that you can't benefit from trade. There's always a price at which they could benefit from trade. So you can always just cross that one out. So you're looking for a price in between the two opportunity costs. And what else should I mention about this? I think that's it. If you have any questions, please email me. You will have questions just like all of the parts I showed you in video 1 and the 2 questions I just showed you here on exam 1. So please make sure you are very comfortable with this. And if you're not, ask me for help. That's what I'm here for. Okay, I hope you all have a great day.